Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with yours truly, Greg Gaston, joined today by Frank Bonner, the Daily Memphian Tigers football beat writer, also our producer, Natalie Van Gundy. Thanks for being with us. And a lot of news that is happening and breaking, in fact, in the last hour as we tape this podcast on a Tuesday. Frank, the news finally in on Ryan Silverfield. We knew it was only a matter of time, but we did not know what the details behind a new contract. It's a 5-year deal, going to pay him pretty handsomely. So first of all, your thoughts on the new deal with Ryan Silverfield, and then we'll talk about the particulars.
Well, yeah. I think we talked about it, several months ago that after the year that he had, Memphis was going to have to ante up in some way in a new deal or a new extension. And so, 5 years, worth $2.25 million. I think both sides can walk away from this feeling like they did a good job on how the contract was constructed. In terms of the details, he'll get salary benchmarks if he gets a 9-win season, if he gets a 10-win season and a conference championship game appearance. And so that's another way to boost the contract. And then obviously all the incentives that come with it in terms of bowl game wins and stuff like that. But a 5-year deal, if you're Ryan Silverfield, you have to be happy with the fact that Memphis is kind of solidifying you as their coach moving forward in the future.
They're coming off an amazing season in which they won 10 games and went on. Obviously, the 10th was the AutoZone Liberty Bowl game. It seemed like to me that the holdout was probably the years. Are you surprised that it's 5 years?
Yeah, not totally surprised, but I thought it would have been like a 4-year deal. But to get a 5-year deal, if you're Ryan, that's pretty good to be locked in for 5 years. But yeah, if I had to guess, I would have thought a 4-year deal just because you know how college football is. This stuff can change on a dime. We talked about the last podcast that, just a year earlier, folks were upset at keeping Ryan, and then he has a 10-3 season, and now everybody's pushing Memphis to have the contract. To his credit, he earned that. But I did think that it was going to be 4 instead of 5. But maybe that was like you said, maybe that was the holdout in terms of the years.
Yeah, that's just a guess on my part. But the days of matching up the coach with the incoming freshman class, 4 years to 4 years, those days are long gone. With the transfer portal, with coaches that move, with players that move, you don't necessarily need that. But it's still reassuring to any player that comes in, knowing that the coach is at least under contract for multiple years. And in this case, 5 years.
Yeah, and honestly, the 5th year doesn't really even matter. I mean, look, Ryan was on a 5-year contract in his last one, and heading into the 5th year, he has a brand new contract. And so I think if for programs that are planning on keeping their coach, the coach never reaches the 5th year usually before he gets a new contract anyway.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
So the deal, again, on paper, according to the release from the University of Memphis, is a total of $12.25 million. Frank talked about the incentives and clauses that you hit and things of that nature. 5-year deal, 2.2 this year, 2.25 in 2025, 2.5 in 2026, 2.6 in 2027, and $2.7 million in 2028. I would think, Frank, right now, the situation the University of Memphis is in athletics-wise in the American Conference, unfortunately not having moved on to a Power 5, not having gotten that invite, that when you're getting close to $3 million for a football coach, not to mention what you're paying the basketball coach annually, whoever that coach may be, you're probably getting up there near max, I would think.
Yeah, I would say so because you only have so many resources, right, to bump that pay grade up and up and up. But what I am curious to see in the contract that we don't know is how much more money does Ryan have available to pay assistant coaches?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how much extra did he get in those funds? Because that's also important in terms of keeping your staff the way you want to keep it.
Well, that's a great point. And I don't know. I haven't been given or been privy to that information. This, again, is a breaking story that's happened in the last 30 minutes as we tape this podcast. And maybe that's information that somehow will come out. But that leads me into our second topic, and that is the loss of Lou Esposito. Speaking of assistant coaches, Lou Esposito, who in the offseason, Ryan Silverfield was able to hire as a former Tiger coming back home to become the co-defensive coordinator and the defensive line coach. He was the second former Tiger in this offseason to be hired by Ryan Silverfield, Reggie Howard being the other. And we had a chance to talk to Lou. You did, I did, just a couple of weeks ago. And he talked about, checking this off his bucket list, being able to go back and coach for his team, his alma mater. But in just the last few days, the report came out that Lou Esposito is leaving and is headed to the University of Michigan, where he's been offered the defensive line coaching job. Again, I don't think it's hypocritical, because I surely do believe that he really does care about Memphis and was excited about the job. But Frank, money talks, prestige talks. This is the defending national champions, and they've come out and reached out to Lou. I don't think people should hold any type of grudge for him kind of zipping into Memphis in a few months, zipping out.
Yeah. Also, and this is a man who, spent 6 years at Western Michigan in that area. And I don't know, like his family situation or whatever, but, if he has, a wife and kids, your wife and kids have been in that area for 6 years. If you have an opportunity to not uproot your entire family and keep them in that area, not everything is just about the position. Family goes into this too. And so to still stay around that area and possibly not have to uproot your family, I think you also have to put that into play as to why he jumped ship to go to Michigan outside of just the money.
Oh, there's a lot of reasons. And he does have a family. I think he has 3 or 4 children. And they were ready to go. They were already enrolled at Collierville High School. They hadn't started. The son plays football. So they were ready. They were all in. In fact, he said that to me, that when they took the family vote, either it was going to be unanimous or he wasn't leaving, and it was unanimous. But you make a great point. If you can get a great opportunity and you don't have to uproot your family. Now, I don't know exactly how far Western Michigan is from Ann Arbor. I don't know the Michigan as far as distances. For example, if it's anything close, he wouldn't have to sell his house. But if it's a distance, then you're talking about still having to uproot the family and moving out of the school system, out of that area. So whether you're moving 80 to 100 to 200 miles or whatever the case may be, or going completely out of state, it's still uprooting the family. Yes, that's important. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is, and I'm sure this was, again, given the green light by his family members, this is a chance to coach at the University of Michigan. This is a chance to coach the defending national champions. This is a chance to make a lot more money. I can guarantee you that, although I don't figures. So yes, all that family talk is part of it, Frank, but this is a prestigious and lucrative move. So again, nobody should shake their head and go, come on, Lou, you just came to Memphis. These chances don't always come around the corner.
No, and to your question about the distance, the two universities are about 100 miles away from each other.
Okay. So again, you got to move.
Not extremely far, but, about probably an hour and a half drive or so.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I think after a while it would become a pain in the rear to travel 100 miles back and forth, unless you're going to get a little place there in Ann Arbor. And I guarantee you, the family doesn't want that. So more than likely they'll end up moving. But I want to wish Lou nothing but the best. In the meantime, here's Ryan Silverfield. We're talking about the contract today. He has to find a replacement. We're in the middle of spring football. There's still plenty of time, obviously, before camp opens up in August. But any thoughts on that, Frank? Have you heard any names?
No, I haven't yet. I mean, stuff is kind of moving so fast. I mean, not only do you have to find a new D-line coach, but now I'm assuming Hankins takes over the defensive coordinator job by itself. Um,
Hmm.
and so you've got that there, but I haven't heard any chatter about a replacement yet. Now that the Ryan Silverfield contract stuff is solidified and done, Ryan can hit the ground running on trying to find his D line replacement. Hopefully, sooner than later, if you're Memphis, in terms of trying to get as much out of the spring camp that you can get. But um, all in all, I think the Memphis coaching staff looks to be in a good place. I know losing Lou Esposito doesn't help, um, but you look at what is in that locker room right now, and you like what you see. You're solidified in your head coach. I'm sure Ryan will find another guy that he likes as at D lineman. The only thing that is a little concerning about the search is that it's so late, and so how many guys are actually still available would be my only question.
Hmm. Well, Memphis has proven that they can get coaches. They can also lose coaches. A lot have moved on and have gone on to coach in bigger programs or at bigger programs and even the NFL. So I'm sure they'll find a good replacement. And as far as whether or not they go with another co-defensive coordinator to join Coach Hankins, perhaps they elevate somebody from within the staff. But we live in a day and age now where there's assistant coaches, associate coaches on the staff. A lot of them are just titles, and it may have been simply to give Lou more incentive to come to Memphis by giving him that title. Not that he wouldn't have those responsibilities, but I could easily see Coach Hankins being the DC and not having a DC next to his name or adding somebody else. So we'll see how that all turns out. In the meantime, I believe it's 5 practices. Today would be the 6th practice that will be under their belt, moving along of the 15 they get for spring football. And then, of course, the spring game, which will be coming up on the 20th of this month. I know that you don't get the access that you would love to have, Frank, but have you seen anything? I had, by the way, Seth Hennigan on my radio show today on Sports 56, and he was fantastic, had some interesting things to say. We were talking about Mario Anderson, the big transfer portal pickup, and we talked about him on last week's podcast. He was telling me that he's missed some time. He's been dealing with an injury. Not sure exactly what that's all about, but hopefully you get that out of the system and he's 100% for the fall. But Seth was talking glowingly about the acquisition of him, but also that running back room with Jay Ducker now back after the redshirt year last year, Brandon Thomas and Sutton Smith. But anything else you're hearing or seeing from spring football practice?
Like you said, I don't get to see a whole lot. I know like one guy that I had mentioned before, Davion Ross is back to fully healthy, so I think that's huge for that secondary. Um,
Yes.
I'm interested to see what the quarterback battle is looking like under Seth Hennigan, because obviously Seth is number one, number two still isn't solidified, or and so we'll see what's going on there, and then the offensive line, right? I haven't got to see a whole bunch of offensive line or anything like that, but I as the practices go on, I am going to kind of ask the coaching staff, who's emerging as potential starters on that O line, because they did lose a lot after last season, and so those are kind of the things that I'm slowly paying attention to right now.
Yeah, I'm curious about that O line as well. Seth was talking glowingly about Xavier Hill, but as you know, and as you just mentioned, they've lost a few in the portal. They've gained a few in the portal, but they also have a couple of injuries, guys we won't even see in the ring that'll be vying for positions in. So you can't really get, I think, a clear picture of what they're doing with the offensive line. Also, once practice wraps up, and this is kind of looking into the crystal ball, there's no way of knowing how each player is feeling and thinking right now. But Ryan has cautioned us, as he does every year since the advent of the portal, Frank, that expect probably a few players to leave.
Yeah, and we talked about this last podcast. There'll be some players that leave just because that's the nature of it. But and I could be wrong, because college football is a wild card. But I'm not anticipating any names that are expected to be major contributors to enter the portal, just because of like so much momentum from last year is coming into this year. If you're a guy that is expected to be a guy for this team. I don't really see you leaving unless you think that you can get significant more NIL money in
Hmm.
another market. And if that was the case, I feel like you would have left before spring ball started.
No, I think you're right about that. We talked also last week about Seth Hennigan, and as far as the portal is concerned, and he didn't go into the portal, and he stayed at Memphis, and he's talked about having Rock Taylor and Demir Blankensee and others that have come back. But he did say, and I thought this was interesting when I had him on the show, talking about schools reaching out to him. And I said, well, what's interesting, Seth, is that that's called tampering. I mean, really, they're not supposed to contact players that are not yet in the portal. But then again, you think about it, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. Well, sometimes you got to know what's available for you before you decide you want to jump in the portal. But the rules, as far as I know, and I know it's loose rules and there's a lot of regulations that need to be put into place, but it's supposed to be you enter the portal, then you're contacted. Not contacted by the coach, contacted by collectives, contacted by school administrators. It's just weird the way it goes. But he said he was contacted. I didn't ask him to name names, but we know that he was contacted and offered. And after speaking with Coach Silverfield, looking at the NIL situation, finding out who was returning, it went hand in hand with Tim Cramsey, as Cramsey has told us that for him to come back, it was important that Seth was coming back. It's kind of strange, but tampering is going on, Frank. I just don't think that anybody's doing anything about it.
Yeah, and because what can you do about it? I read
Right.
a while ago. It was an athletic story, and they were talking to coaches anonymously about knowing that guys are being tampered with from other programs, and there's basically nobody regulating it to make it a big enough deal to where any program would stop. I mean, you see how Seth just nonchalantly told you that he was being contacted because that is the norm. It shouldn't
Right.
be, but it is. I've heard, uh, a story from a previous player about being contacted by another school at one point. It's just something that happens, and you can't. It's hard to regulate because I don't think it's the program, right? Necessarily like the head coach reaching out to a kid. No, it's a collective or a guy who represents a collective who isn't directly associated with the program who's making the contact first. And there's so many gray areas that it's hard to bottle up and create rules for.
Right. Right. But they're going to eventually have to. And it's going to have to be unilateral where everybody adheres to the same rules. I have no problems right now with what's going on, with the exception if a coach, and again, more than likely it's not a coach, but if a coach does reach out to a player that's not in the portal, I would hope that player would report that coach. I know it won't happen, but I wish they would, because that to me would be the ultimate tampering. Okay, couple of other notes before we wrap things up. April 13th, for all the ladies out there that are listening and watching this podcast, will be the annual University of Memphis Women's Clinic. That'll be at 5 p.m. Billy J. Murphy Athletic Complex. That's always a hoot. And then the game itself, the spring game, will be April 20th. That'll be 3 p.m. That's a Saturday afternoon, not the usual Friday night stripe. So that'll be coming up on April 20th. Also, changing gears just for a moment before we wrap it up. Frank, you're wearing a couple of different hats here in the last week. You wrote a story about Memphis baseball and Dante Stewart, their second baseman to be exact. Today, Memphis Ole Miss playing baseball, which will be a few hours from now as we tape this podcast. And I have been so impressed with Dante Stewart, what he has done since coming over this year. Can you tell folks so they can go ahead and either subscribe to the DM or find a way to read that story so they can enjoy it, because you did a great job with that?
Yeah, well, for one, his family ties, he's related to a lot of different athletes, for one. Uh, and so he's related to a Bohemian sprinter from the Summer Olympics. He's related to a boxer. He's related to Jazz Chisholm's over at who plays for the Marlins. I mean, he's
Mhm.
got a family full of athletes for starters. And then the other thing is just, the story just kind of unpacking how he approaches batting at the plate. I mean, he's the one who hit the fourth full cycle in school history since 2001 against South Florida a few games ago. And so we just
Right.
kind of dived into his approach to batting. Chisholm, Jazz from the Marlins gave him some good pointers. Who's his cousin, and so we just kind of talked about that. And it's a story to kind of get into the mind of a batter.
Well, check it out, folks, at the Daily Memphian. He just recently had his on base streak snapped at 46 straight games, going back to his days last year before he came to Memphis. But he has been a terrific player. But that is a terrific story from Frank. And then a final note: we don't have Parth Upadhyay this week, but Memphis basketball in the news also today. More breaking news: Carl Sharonfont, that has been confirmed by Parth. Carl Sharonfont, who was a freshman last year for Memphis, has entered the transfer portal. So it's going to be another wild spring and summer for Penny Hardaway to put together a basketball roster for the Tigers for the 24-25 season. So there you go. Again, the big news just breaking within the hour. Ryan Silverfield gets a new 5-year contract worth over $12 million. Frank, thank you so much. We'll talk again next week.
Appreciate you, Greg.
That is Frank Bonner, the Daily Memphian Tigers football beat writer. I want to thank, as always, our producer, Natalie Van Gundy. I'm sure Tim Buckley will be back with us next week, the Daily Memphian deputy sports editor and senior writer. I want to remind everybody that you can check out all the other Daily Memphian podcasts, including the food podcast, Sound Bites. It's hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield. The Sidebar with Eric Barnes. It's about arts, culture, and everything in between. All of our podcasts are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts. Until next week, have a great one, everybody.